Hello, everyone, and welcome again to the show. I am your host, the one and the only, Proud 4%er, where I take my time to help you, my viewers, think outside of the 96% Democratic black voting box. Hey my 96%ers, today my rant will be on one of the hidden facts of how Republican President Dwight D. Eisenhower stepped up to the plate in order to provide actual equal civil rights for blacks at a time when lip service appeasement was the norm from the racist left. The Democrats have been given credit for FDR's New Deal social programs and Executive Order 8802, which declared there shall be no discrimination in the employment of workers in defense industries and in government. The order also established the Fair Employment Practices Committee, called the FEPC, to investigate incidents of discrimination. Your Democrat Party-led Congress terminated the FEPC. Harry Truman appointed a panel which recommended more adequate means and procedures for the protection of blacks' civil rights. In 1947, among its proposals was a permanent FEPC and strengthening the Civil Rights Division of the Department of Justice. Truman called on Congress to enact the recommendations, and the Democrats threatened a filibuster. He issued an executive order abolishing segregation in the armed forces through Executive Order 99/81, facing resistance from the Democratic Congress and Senate. But blacks across the nation still faced racial discrimination on all levels, while in large numbers supported a political party who opposed every attempt to provide such them rights. 96%ers, those actions by both FDR and Truman were never based on any hardcore principle of blacks truly being given equal rights, but rather guided on the need to appease them for the purpose of gaining political capital, or the demands of people like a Randolph Phillips, who presented a list of grievances to FDR regarding the civil rights of blacks, demanding that an executive order be issued to stop job discrimination in the defense industry, to threaten that he was prepared to bring 10, 20, 50,000 blacks on the White House lawn if demands were not met. 96%ers, in national politics today, Social Security is often called the third rail, meaning if politicians dare to touch it, they do so at their own political peril. During the time of these calculated political moves by Ford and Truman, the third rail of national politics was racial segregation. Touch it and you die politically. National politics reflected the nation's dominant white racism, which included Washington. No president prior to Ike even attempted to address this situation personally, much less do anything about it. When Dwight D. Eisenhower, better known as Ike, became president, daily life in the nation's capital for blacks was not much different than it was for blacks in the South. Blacks there endured the same racial segregation. Public accommodations, hotels, restaurants, movie theaters, public housing, and parks were restricted to whites. Blacks were discriminated against by employers and labor unions openly by hiring them only for the most menial tasks. 96%ers, DC's city government practiced outright discrimination itself. Black policemen in the nation's capital could not ride in the same patrol cars as whites, and its fire department was segregated. 5 of the city's 45 fire companies were all black, and the others all white. With political peril looming, Ike chose to attack this problem head-on. Given the political barriers he faced, it's even more remarkable that he changed the city forever. Not guided by political expediency, but by principle, which is how the GOP operates. Before he was inaugurated, to his future staff he made it clear that publicity or outright conflict could defeat the effort, but that he intended to get results. On principle, days before he was sworn in, he met with the chairman of the House and Senate committees that controlled the District of Columbia's budget to let them know that he would insist that all citizens of the nation's capital would be treated equally. Washington was controlled by a 3-member board of commissioners. There was no elected mayor or city council. The commission members were appointed by the president for staggered terms of office, and only one vacancy existed when Ike took office. As time went on, Ike was able to replace the other commissioners with ones who supported his desegregation efforts. Ike appointed Samuel Spencer, a white lawyer who had no prior association with the city government, that he made certain was opposed to segregation. Ike then chipped away at Washington's system of racial discrimination, even though he suffered constant interference from your Democrat Party Congress, which never overlooked even petty opportunities to obstruct Ike's efforts, such as Democrat Representative James C. Davis of Georgia, who threatened to withhold federal funds from the city if the school board published a pamphlet that he felt endorsed racial integration. Yes, one of your loving Democrats. But the evil old racist Republican Ike ignored them and continued pushing the changes he could make in spite of the Democrat-led Congress. Why? Because that is how principled people work. Yes, 96%ers. This quiet campaign by this Republican moved on two fronts: legal action and the power of persuasion. In 1952, many local laws in Washington enforced segregation of the races. Some years earlier, District of Columbia attorneys had filed a lawsuit to resurrect a series of Reconstruction local laws that had never been repealed, some dating back to 1872, which forbade businesses to refuse service to any respectable, well-behaved person and required restaurants to serve, at their usual prices, such well-behaved persons. In a court case in 1953, the court ruled unanimously in favor of their action, and segregated restaurants in the nation's capital were outlawed. And it also meant that, for the first time, all units of public housing in Washington became available for rental to any respectable, well-behaved person, simply meaning 96%ers. For the first time, blacks were given actual equal rights in the nation's capital. The Democrat Presidents Roosevelt and Truman previously issued executive orders aimed at reducing racial segregation in the federal workforce and contractors doing business with the federal government, but progress was only beginning. Ike issued new executive orders to more forcefully eliminate racial discrimination in the federal workforce and required the same regulations to apply to private employers operating under federal contracts. Led by Commissioner Spencer, these stronger regulations were codified for the government of the District of Columbia and its contractors. In 1954, the Supreme Court's decision in Brown v. Board of Education opened school enrollment to all citizens, and the D.C. school system was among the first in the nation where compliance was enforced, all under Republican action. In the face of racist Democrat congressional pressure, many proposed legal actions were simply not possible. But Ike used his powers of persuasion, like calling in top filmmakers Jack Warner, Samuel Goldwyn, Louis B. Mayer, and others, and convinced them to admit blacks into the major theaters. And he called in the major hotel owners and applied the same reasoning. One by one they complied. By the time Ike left office, theaters and hotels in Washington were open to everyone. 96%ers. No equal opportunity laws existed, and your Democrat Congress wasn't likely to pass them even if they had been proposed. Ike's only tool was to personally demonstrate his deep interest and concern to employers and unions to hire blacks and to promote them to administrative and managerial jobs. And they were doing so by the time Ike left office. His persuasion was exercised wherever it could be that brought to bear victories such as the admission of blacks to the District of Columbia's Medical Society, Nurses Association, Optometric Society, and even After years of stonewalling, the District of Columbia Bar Association took place in response to Ike's hidden hand. Of course, 96%ers, Ike was unable to completely obliterate racial discrimination in the nation's capital city. The police, fire department, and transit company were only beginning to actually integrate when Ike left. But the truth is, this Republican had, however, brought about dramatic progress. Racial segregation in the city's public accommodations had been eliminated, and many private companies followed suit. So much so that Ralph Bunche, a renowned African American of the period, announced that for the first time he could accept a government post because he could now live in Washington without abandoning human dignity. Yes, it was an evil, racist Republican that worked to afford him and all blacks in the nation's capital that dignity. 96%ers. All I can say to you is, think about it. Well, folks, that's all the time I have in this segment. As always, until we next meet, this again is your host, the one and the only proud 4%er, providing you with the necessary tools to cut your way out of the 96% Democratic black voting box.